everybody. Welcome back to the Social Code podcast with me, Jess Sutcliffe, here at Oscar Tech. As you probably know by now, I run the diversity edition of our Social Code podcast. And today we have the amazing Maya Lowe, who runs the DEI at 23andMe. She's been leading the team there for a year and a half and was part of the core group that helped establish a DEI function at the company. She has been with 23andMe for over 6 years, previously working in the customer care and research teams, and was actually recently profiled in the San Francisco Business Times for their Business of Pride 2024. So thank you so much for joining us today, Maya. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. I will leave you to introduce yourself. You will definitely be able to do a little bit more of a better insight into your life than I can.
Where do I even start? Well, like I said, I've been at 23andMe for over 6 years. Actually, this is my second time around even. I'm one of the boomerangs. We have a lot of those here. Yeah. And before that, I was in the militaries. I was a military medic, so I'm a veteran. That was a whole fun thing. I went to college at UC Davis. I studied cell biology, so, very sciencey things. And also worked in medical insurance for a little bit, and then also worked in a clinic for veterans with PTSD and TBI at UCLA, and that was a fantastic job as well. So pretty much everything I've done involves caring for people one way or another, and so I think that's kind of the thread that goes through everything. But my background is really related to genetics and genomics, and so 23andMe it fits a lot of things for me and like what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, 23andMe is obviously a hugely known company in the US, and also the UK now, actually. I actually took a test last year. I thought I'd be able to find a few more brothers and sisters.
But find anybody?
Yeah, exactly. But unfortunately I didn't, just a load of cousins. But yeah, so I am so happy for you to be on the podcast today. I know we've had a discussion before, and what you're doing over there is amazing, and I'm sure the people that are listening really benefit from listening to sort of your aspect of your journey into the diversity over at 23andMe and sort of what got you into that. So I guess that's a good place to start. And if you could give us some insight into what your journey of getting into the DEI space looks like.
I think it really kind of started with being introduced to the idea of community-based participatory research. And so like when I was in college and just after, and when I was on the research team, the idea of, not going into research and not going into communities with an idea of like what people need, but asking them, hey, what do you want to get out of this research? What would you like to get as compensation? What's important to you? And actually like basing your research around that. And so there's a lot of concepts in community-based participatory research that really tie in with DEI. That, and I had an interest in public health, we'll still have an interest in public health. But there's also a lot of, make sure that we're being inclusive and doing whatever we can to help people be healthy, be happy, to be able to thrive, right? And like I said, also just, a lot of my jobs have involved caring for people, which requires a lot of empathy and, wanting to see people, again, be happy, be healthy, want to see them thrive. But it was towards the end of 2019, really, I started to get involved more with DEI here at 23andMe. And at the time, it was very bare bones. There was like a committee, a little council, and the VP of our people team shared that. And there was, anyone who was interested could be there. And it was maybe like 10, 20 people. But we didn't do a whole lot. We only had 2 ERGs at the time. There was our LGBTQ plus ERG and our Black at ERG, which is for Black and African American employees. But then it was, 2020 happened, the pandemic, the murder of George Floyd, and all of the other things that happened that summer that really sparked people being more committed, more aware, I guess, first of what was going on, of all the inequities and injustice. And our CEO said that she wanted to do more. She really put a stake in the ground and said, like, we can do better. And so I was one of the people who volunteered to be part of the group that helped build that out. We worked with a consultant early on, but it just kind of went from there. And then we got a director of DEI, and I started to work with her more closely and wound up joining the team. And then when she left, I was kind of moved over into her position. And like you said, I've been doing that for a year and a half now. And it's been a real journey. I've learned a lot, but it's been amazing. I don't see myself doing anything else at this point.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. I think it's nice to see as well that a company is still focused on that and not letting it go just because, let's say, the trend is down of creating more inclusive spaces, workspaces, more importantly, for people to join. I went through a similar phase during that time. Obviously, the George Floyd incident happened. It became very I became very aware that there was such a lack of education around what is actually happening in the world to people that don't identify as part of the Black community. And that, translates through to any underrepresented demographic within the world, but especially sort of America, the tech space in general, which is very white male dominated.
Hmm.
But I guess a good next question then is to get your insight of why you think, it's really important to build diverse and inclusive teams within a business.
It's a great question. And I think there are kind of three things I'll try and like hit, but three main reasons why it's important to have that. One is maybe a little more bottom line focused, perhaps. I don't think of it that way, but it might be. And that's really, companies are here to provide products to customers, but it's very hard to build products or provide products for people that are good. I mean, there's so many examples out there of someone rolling something out that winds up having a backlash, right?
Yeah.
Because the team who put that together was saying, "Oh, I think this group, again, community-based participatory research, I think they will like this," and then that is not at all how it's received, right? If you want to build products that actually resonate with customers, that are useful for customers and for people, and if you want to show that like you actually care about the people who are on the other end of what you're doing, having a diverse team is huge. You need to have people who are parts of these different communities to provide feedback. Even like here, when we rolled out our sex and gender updates in the end of 2020, beginning of 2021, the LGBTQ plus ERG was so heavily involved with that. And the response to it was fantastic. There are a lot of people who are gender nonconforming, who are trans, who are non-binary, what have you, who said, "This is amazing. I can see myself more in the product. I feel like you actually care about me and my experience." And that goes a long way. But then another one is for recruiting, right? Which I think more up your alley even.
Yeah.
But even with recruiting, you can bring in as many people as you want. You can try and hire really diverse teams. But if you're not actually focusing on the inclusion piece, if you're not thinking about inclusive behaviors and creating a sense of belonging, you'll just have a revolving door. You're not going to keep those people who actually are providing useful input from their communities, useful perspectives. You don't hold on to talent. And then, what's the cost of like recruiting and training up a new employee, right? We
Yeah.
don't usually talk about that. That's not always calculated, but that's a significant cost. There's all these other people who are involved in it. There's obviously money that goes to either the recruiting team or to an outside agency. You can avoid all of that if you actually work on your inclusive behaviors and making teams, making people feel like they actually belong, like they're part of a team. But then I think there's also the moral case, right? And not in a virtue signaling, performative type of way, but just that you should want everyone to have an equal opportunity for success. You should want
Yeah.
everyone to feel like they can be themselves at work and that that's okay. You should want communities that you are surrounded by to feel like you have a positive impact on them, and that you care about them. Again, like there are probably a lot of other reasons I can get into. Those are the three main ones. And hopefully at least one of those resonates with somebody out there.
Yeah, I
But
sure they do. I mean, I've had multiple conversations, all of which I agree with. That's one of the first things that I say when I, run through the details of the podcast. It's all well and good getting representation within your business, but if you don't want to stay there, you've done half of the job, and then you've got to redo that job again. And I think, I again, similarly, when I was pitching sort of diversity and inclusion initiatives within my first company that I joined, in recruitment, I was fine doing initiatives because it was the right thing to do. And I thought education was needed, but we had to pitch it also from a business standpoint that it is a good business decision. You're going to build better products. And it's not just
Mhm.
diversity in terms of, race or gender, ethnicity, whatever the case is, but people from different backgrounds bring different perspectives, different ideas of, and you're reaching a whole new market that you might not have reached before. And especially for companies like 23andMe, I imagine there is so many different backgrounds of people that are using your service, regardless of where they are from, that can potentially relate to a certain product that you bring out or a new feature or whatever the case is. So I imagine companies like that, especially because you're not targeting one demographic, that's probably the opposite of 23andMe.
Ah,
So I imagine it's going to be hugely beneficial for your company. And then one thing that I found, especially when I first started out doing stuff around diversity, was, I mean, I was using Google, to be honest. I had no idea what a DEI strategy looked like.
mhm.
I wasn't getting much support, so Google was my best friend. Wikipedia, which is probably the worst search engine to be able to help with that. But what does building a DEI strategy involve, and what advice would you give to companies or individuals that want to incorporate this into their workplace?
Another great question. I think, the first place to start, honestly, and I think it gets overlooked a lot, is you need to establish your baseline. You need to actually understand where you are before you can say this is where we want to be. And so that involves like actually getting metrics, looking at data, doing pulse surveys, trying to understand like, do people feel like they're included? Do they feel like they can show up? Does their do they feel like they have an equal chance at being promoted? Don't see themselves at the company in 2 years? Why? Digging into that, and then also looking at like your headcount metrics, your hiring metrics, your promotion metrics, attrition, all of that stuff. And there's so many little things you can dig into. And then you can start to kind of identify like, okay, here are where the problem areas are. Um, Outside of that, but also really kind of goes along with it, is if you don't already have ERGs, that is going to be the next big thing that you want to do, is establish a process for people to create a community group, a resource group for employees. And for anyone to be able to say, hey, I don't see my community here, I would like to start one. And then giving those people the resources and support so that they can be effective in what they're doing. And then from there, then you can start to think about like, okay, where do we want to be? And really, thinking of like a 3-year vision, a 5-year vision of we want to build these products. And so we need more diversity in our teams. We want to make sure that people actually stick around. We want to make sure that people can show up as themselves. And you can kind of set up your strategy to focus on the areas that are more at issue internally. And that's really at a very high level, but there are also other things that you can do to build it in. DEI maturity models are hugely important. I think also kind of get either overlooked or don't get talked about upfront enough. But also being able to say like, this is where you are in terms of your DEI progress, because it is a journey, really. Being able to evaluate yourself, you can see your next step. It's almost like a career framework, right? Or a career ladder where you can see like, oh, this is to get to that next role. This is what I need to do. So being able to evaluate yourself, I think overall is huge. And then build it into the work. You want to find ways to build it into the work that people are doing day to day. Because if it's not being approached with like DEI in mind, it's not going to translate out, especially when you're thinking about how do we impact customers? How do we impact the community? And so having, a DEI by design process, having people who can bring DEI into their day to day and finding ways to do that. We have what we call pods here, which are people who do the work day to day, like in communications, in learning and development, in our product R&D and Hinge teams. And they do all sorts of other things, but they come together and talk about like, okay, for DEI, what can we do? What can we focus on? And that's been huge in like making sure that it's more baked in, that it's in our DNA, if you will, right? Be a
Yeah,
little corny.
use the pun.
Um, Thank you. But yeah, I think that's really the best way to approach it. But it's going to look different for everybody. Because a company that's a lot larger, there's going to be you have more volunteers you can lean on, but there's going to be different problems than a company that's under 1,000 people, say, or a company that's under 100, right? So there is a lot of personalization that has to happen. But I think those are kind of the big things to do. See where you're at, establish a baseline, think about what can be improved and what that looks like over 3 to 5 years.
Exactly. And I think attainable goals as well, because it's all well and good saying, you really want, and metrics, touch base because you've got to get the right talent in line, but just having access to a wider pool of people, more representation in that pool gives you a better opportunity of getting the best talent. But those attainable goals within that DEI strategy, I think is, crucial, because if you're setting yourself up to fail. It's just going to be something that probably gets let go or forgotten about further down the line. I guess we've covered the why it's important, and I mean I'm hoping people that have listened to my podcast for a while now don't have any questions around the why, but you never know. But more important question is how we do that. So, what kind of tools and methods have you used to help create representation? Obviously, I deal with sort of the recruitment aspect of that. And also, what challenges have you faced in terms of that? I think one thing that we speak about on the podcast a lot is the positives, but it's not always as straightforward as people make it.
No, it's not. So I'll come back to that little piece there, but I think one is like looking at your recruiting strategy. In the US right now, it's honestly not. I would say it's a little more ill-advised to set hiring targets, right? There's a lot of reasons for that. We don't have to get into it. That gets a little political, but there are ways that you can actually work to increase representation. So some of that is establishing relationships with community groups, finding people in your area, finding different professional organizations, working with HBCUs, with HSIs, Hispanic Serving Institutions. There are a few other ones that you can look into. Actually establishing genuine relationships with them. That was one of the first things I did on the DEI team when I came over was, hey, for recruiting things, who can we work with? Who are people who are in our area? How can we show up? And not be self-serving as much, but really say hey, we want to be here. We want to work with you. And then finding ways to develop a top of funnel approach where really you're making sure that you're getting as many diverse candidates at the top of the funnel as possible. You don't, or at least we're not in the business. I'm not in the business of telling hiring managers, you need to hire this, you need to hire that, you need to be doing this. But if you're actually working on that top of funnel, if you're getting more candidates in who represent more different identities, the more likely you are to get to the end of the line, to that final interview stage where you have diverse candidates. And, research shows that if you have 4 people in the final interview stage and 2 of them are women, you're, I think, 60, 70% likely to hire a woman at that point.
Wow.
Where if it's 1, it's under 50%. Whereas, you think it would be maybe more like 50% once you get to, no, but so that's the thing. You want to make sure that you're getting more diversity at that final interview stage. Other tools and methods, like I said, looking at data, really not ignoring data, making sure that you have a dashboard that is focused on DEI metrics so you can track that and look at it quarterly at the very least. That's huge also. And then working on, in your training, not focusing on kind of the usual suspects. Unconscious bias is important to address, but also training can backfire. So you want to focus more on training around what does it mean to be inclusive, right? Because I've been saying, it's inclusive behaviors. People talk about inclusion, but it's really behaviors that drive inclusion. And so you're making that case to people and explain these are things that help make people feel included, which gives them that sense of belonging, which makes them want to stay. So it's thinking a little bit outside of oh, we're going to talk about just microaggressions and unconscious bias and and that'll be all that we need, right? That's not all that you need. And so there's a little bit of going above and beyond, trying to say what's actually the root thing that we're trying to address here. Yes, unconscious bias is horrible, but it's there's a lack of inclusion, and it stems through that, and if you just tell people you have bias, they get defensive.
That's for sure.
So thinking of your audience, right? Exactly. And challenges, I would say, and I know I guess in the interest of time kind of skipping over other tools and methods, but they all kind of relate to that. Challenges, honestly, is getting people to understand that there's always more work to do, and we're here in the Bay Area, and the Bay Area is famously liberal. And so you have a lot of people who see themselves as being very progressive, as being very liberal. And so there is a tendency for people to say oh, well, you know what? I'm going to vote for Kamala Harris. I support, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. I've got it covered. I'm an ally. People can still make mistakes. People can still have biases that they're not addressing, little blind spots and things like that. And so making the business case, getting leadership buy-in, that's always going to be a challenge. That is always going to be a challenge, especially when people are cutting costs and these sorts of things. And you're thinking about do we want all this attention from outside? All this political pressures coming up. I mean, the recent things that have happened in the past 3 weeks in the country, like DEI keeps coming up as this, like, this is the specter. Oh my God, DEI is what led to this. And no, it's not the case. But kind of, we're not on a little tangent there.
Keep going.
But yeah,
Wait for a great podcast.
but you want to make sure the leadership buys in. But
Yeah.
beyond that, you want to make sure that people understand, like, there's always more that you can do. You can't just kind of rest on your laurels. You can't say, like, oh, well, I believe in this, and so I've covered everything. You need to keep educating yourself. You need to encourage people to want to educate themselves and understand, like, just because you're an ally to LGBTQ people, or just because you're an ally to Black people, doesn't mean that you're an ally to all groups, right?
Yeah.
You could be doing that, but also maybe not be an ally to women. You could do that and not be an ally to people who have disabilities, visible or invisible.
Yeah.
Right? There's a lot of different dimensions. And that's a huge challenge.
Yeah.
Money is always going to be a challenge, again.
Yeah.
But getting people to understand, like, hey, we can keep progressing. There's always more to be done personally for yourself. That is such a challenge. And I feel like that's what I spent a lot of my time lately, like, talking about and educating on. It's like, don't just say, like, hey, my last little thought on this is, people think that allies, they can say, I'm an ally. No, you don't get to say that you're an ally. The communities have to tell you that you're an ally.
Yeah.
Right? If you find yourself saying, like, oh, no, I'm an ally, you're already doing it wrong. You've got a lot of progress to make. It's how you show up. It's how you do these things. And yeah, that's all, I think, always going to be a challenge in this space. But part of what makes it rewarding when you see things
shift. Yeah, exactly. I think that positive approach as well to avoiding, like, unconscious bias and all that kind of thing, where people, like you said, they get defensive about it. I think, unfortunately, people that get defensive about it don't realize that everyone has unconscious bias. Like, every single person. I do, you do, my boss does, everyone in the world has unconscious bias, and it's just a natural state. But I think being conscious of that, and making, especially in the workplace, a little bit more of an optimistic way to move forward, or even rewording, being careful how you word things in terms of presenting sort of DEI to the workspace. And especially, like you said, leadership, that's where it all trickles down from. If your leadership aren't brought in, then there's no hope for anyone. So having people at least understand it at that level, I think, is super important. And the challenges that you mentioned there, I think a lot of companies or individuals that have felt maybe not included within the workplace is important to note there as well. I guess this leads very nicely on to the next question around inclusivity. Obviously, it's a big part of a huge part of DEI, and we touched on it very briefly earlier on. Inclusivity side is a lot harder to measure. What do you think companies can do to improve their inclusivity, or make employees feel valued?
There's a lot, honestly. I think the thing that we've been working on here that I think is important is talking more about accessibility.
Yeah.
And in your products and internally in the tools that you use. But that's one thing that can be done. And I think, again, it's one of those things that we don't talk about enough. Focusing on accessibility, especially, neurodiverse employees, for instance. Some of them can benefit from different, like, software packages that help them, like, navigate work, that, part of the laptop that they're on, but, like, screen readers, things like that. Like, there are a lot of great tools out there.
Yeah.
Having something like that so that employees can actually be as if, like, they can meet their potential, you're helping them, that goes a long way. Making sure that, like, your building is accessible and things like that. But then also,
some would say,
yes. And there's the legal requirements, but then there are other things, like, actually, is your building more built around stairs or elevators, or is there a mix of both? Like, there's a lot of things that go into that.
Yeah.
But then also addressing microaggressions and being aware of what those look like and how to respond to them, that's such a huge part. How people respond to microaggressions, and understanding that most of your marginalized employees, or employees who come from marginalized groups, experience microaggressions daily, if not daily, weekly, monthly, right? These things come up. Um, you know, and so as an example, and something that we really talk about a lot here and that I think has gotten a lot of traction, but for non-binary employees, for gender non-conforming employees, saying something like, you guys, that's not actually inclusive, right? Thinking about like the language that you use, thinking about essentialism. You don't want to encourage, don't have a campaign of like, let's get everyone like taking 10,000 steps a day in the office, or like having like, everyone should be taking the stairs. I don't want to, you're excluding a lot of people in that way. You're kind of denying that these people are also employees, approaching things from a very neurotypical way, right? And there's a lot of,
Yeah.
this is how I approach the world, and that must be the same for everybody, and of fighting that. And like you said also, or like we were talking about, at least, recognizing your own blind spots, knowing your own biases, understanding that everyone has biases. There's the Harvard implicit bias test that I go through probably like once every couple months, ones I've already done or new ones, just to see like, hey, am I missing anything? But then also like talking about that. Yeah, you want to make sure that also that people feel comfortable. If you have like dress code policies, reconsider that. Like, or what is the reason for having a dress code policy? Does that maybe like keep people who are trans, who are non-binary, from coming out or from feeling comfortable? The data that I last saw, I think it's like a third or fewer of trans people at work actually show up how they want to be seen, actually are out at work. And that's not including, or that's not just talking about people who are stealth, we'll say, right? People who pass and you wouldn't know that they're trans, right? That's people who don't even want to do anything that would tip their bosses off. They will present with as their assigned sex at birth, right?
Yeah.
Trans women who show up to work with short hair, who don't change their names, who don't ever press that conversation, because of things like dress codes, because of offhand comments about that are transphobic, that are homophobic, that just make people understand like, oh, maybe I'm not safe here. Maybe this isn't a place for me. Not having gender neutral bathrooms. These are all things that very subtly signal, hey, you can't be yourself. There are tons of other communities that also would experience this. Hairstyles. We've got the Crown Act that was passed recently.
Yeah.
Not having prescriptions around it. This is how you need to wear your hair because natural hairstyles should generally be okay. And if you have those sorts of like policies in place, ask yourself why. Why do we have this? What is the point of it? Is it actually benefiting anything, or is it keeping people from wanting to show up? Is it maybe pushing people out? There is a whole lot in there that I just
There
went
is,
through.
100%. And I think,
But
in
yeah,
2024 as well, like, come on, especially when we're talking about hairstyles, like, even in school, like, you're not allowed to dye your hair. Well, this is what it was like in the UK. I don't know if it was like in the US. Not allowed to dye your hair unnatural hair colors. How is that going to affect my ability to study? How is it
exactly.
going to affect my ability to do my job? If anything, if you're not allowed to present as your full self coming to work, whether that's hairstyle, whether that's the gender you identify as, whatever the case is, you're limiting people from actually being able to come to work and focus on work, which is essentially what you've hired them for. So yeah, 100% on that one. I don't know if you've got any more points to add on that side of things.
I mean, I'm just gonna like add one other little thing, but like it's along with like dress codes and stuff like that. I have tattoos. I obviously have a septum piercing, right? Does that make me unprofessional? I don't think so. And it's actually been kind of nice to go to conferences, to talk to people, to talk to candidates, and just be me. Hey, I've got a tattoo showing, and that's not keeping anyone from wanting to work there. That doesn't
Yeah.
make me come across as like actually unprofessional. So again, like ask yourself why. If you don't want to, we don't want tattoos to be showing. Why is that? Because it's not distracting people from doing their work, right? Because you should, if you're at work, you shouldn't be staring at other people all the time for no good reason, anyways, right? But like, really, like, does this keep you from being taken seriously? I would argue no. I would argue no. I think I mean, I could hide it if I want to, and it's easy to do that, but like, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Really making sure that there's a point to any policies you have, and being able to like I love just making people explain the why behind their decisions. And I think that's something people should do when they look at stuff. Why don't we have a gender neutral restroom? Why do we have this dress code policy? What is the point? Just be explicit. And to go back to some of the other stuff, tools and methods that we talked about, I do that a lot. Just okay, so we have this. Why is that the case? What are we trying to do here? Make people say the thing.
Yeah.
Make people say the thing. And if that doesn't at least make it click for them that, oh, maybe this isn't inclusive, maybe this isn't what we should be doing, at least right?
Exactly.
And that goes a long way, at least for employees too. So
And more often than not, it doesn't make sense. Like it's just because it's always been that way.
exactly.
And if we're
That
stuck in
doesn't
the
mean
past, exactly, we're not going to make any progression in any aspect of work or life if we're stuck from how things used to be. And then just a quick question, Maya, because I think Joe can cut this out. But are you comfortable with me asking about your transition?
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm hoping Joe can cut that out. If not,
Yeah. Even if not, hey, it's in there, right? Full self. We're
yeah.
doing this.
What was your experience during your transition in the workplace, and what support have you found helpful or unhelpful?
My experience was interesting, I'll say. If there were trans people at 23andMe, they were stealth or were not out, right? So when I came out, effectively, I was the first person to I am the first person to transition at 23andMe, to show up to work one way and then say, hey, I want to go by this name. I'm like this. We're doing this, and to go through that process. We may have people who were in the closet who worked here who were trans people, not discounting that, but I'm the first person. And so we didn't have any processes in place. And I was scared the entire time. I think it took me a solid 6 months to feel comfortable. When I told my team, I remember that I drafted this email and I told my manager, I told one other person on the team, I had some friends who knew, but I drafted this email and I still remember just that, all right, I'm going to press send and then we'll see what happens. And I kept expecting the worst. And again, if you look at the state of trans employees in the United States, at least, and even internationally, that doesn't usually go well for people. People can still be fired for being trans. People can still be treated as not human. Oh, that was interesting. They can be treated in so many horrible ways, and it's still allowed in some cases. It's still sort of that's just the world that we live in. And so, yeah, at every turn, I was like, oh, people aren't going to want to use my name. They are not going to accept me. They're going to stop talking to me. When I came out to friends, I just braced for my friends are going to stop talking to me also. But at work too, I just kept expecting things to be bad. And it wasn't, but it was bumpy. We didn't have the only time we'd ever had to do name change things were for cis women who got married and were changing their last name.
Yeah.
Right? And so, it's one thing in a computer system to update someone's last name. You change their email. Maybe their username is a little bit different, but usually they don't even change that. If you're doing a full name change, you have to change everything. I had to get a whole new laptop. They had to set up a whole new email for me, which also still, if anyone from Google is out there listening to this, my dead name still shows up if you type in my name. If you type in an email, it'll show you my old email in addition to my current email. It'll show you that still puts that out there for people who are looking, hey, I'm going to send Maya an email. I'm going to add her to this calendar invite. It shows up. It's out there. Maybe people think it's a cousin at this point. I don't know. People think oh, that's Maya's cousin. And they don't put two and two together. But, just there's little things like that of you have to jump through more hoops. And then the thing that I didn't expect, that a lot of people didn't expect, is there's so many things you can't update or change until you've done all the legal stuff. You go to the court, you change your name, and it's a 3-month process before you get that, and then you have to take that to the DMV, get a whole new license, then you can update your social security card, and then after about a year of doing all these things, then finally they can update your name in Workday or in whatever HRIS system you use. And so there are still things you'll still get your W-2 that isn't under your correct name. You're still filing taxes also under your old name, even if this is the case for me. I had my name legally changed for quite a while before that finally got updated. And it just, yeah, again, because I was the first person to go through this, nobody knew any of this. Nobody knew what was necessary. And so we were learning together. I had a lot of great allies around me, a lot of people who were supportive. Again, we don't have a dress code here, which was really nice. There's no one saying like, hey, you shouldn't be wearing this or you can't do that. Something that was really impactful for me, and I talked about this in the feature that I was in last month as well, is that, I was working on our education group. Like, we worked with students, we worked with, junior high, high school, college students, things like that. People would come in looking for like internships, or grad students wanting to get a sense of the industry. And they not only like kept me on that and interacting with people, but let me show up how I wanted to show up. And I wasn't even on hormones yet. I definitely, my hair was still fairly short, but just that they trusted me, like, not even trusted me, but just said like, yeah, this is okay. You can be yourself and still interact with people, and we're not embarrassed by it. Which, again, there are cases of that happening, of like, oh, no, you don't get to be public facing anymore. You don't get to go out and go to conferences. The fact that they kept putting me in those positions, even years later, we're going to send you to Grace Hopper. We're going to send you to this conference, to that conference. You're going to be at our table. You're talking to prospective candidates. And that no one even thought twice about that. That was such a huge show of support, and like made me actually feel like, yeah, no, they see me for who I am. They care about me. They don't think that I'm going to damage our image or our brand or anything else, or drive people away. And that really goes so far. It goes so far. Unhelpful things. We didn't have gender neutral restrooms when I first came out. That was a process that we had to go through. And we had 3 single-use restrooms. And so, they gave me a key to a couple of them, but like, even just like having to go, I work on the 2nd floor, having to go downstairs to one of them, and if someone is in that one, having to go all the way across our courtyard to this one that's out over here, that made me feel like I was set apart. Now I'm more comfortable just being in a women's room, but at the time I still felt uneasy about it. And it was like, oh, this was, hey, we're giving you this key. That's good, right? Like, yes, that helped, but it made me feel set apart. It made me feel special in not a good way, right? People messing up pronouns, misgendering me, things like that, which that's gonna happen. But early on, people they wouldn't correct it, they wouldn't catch it. And I mean, from a employment perspective, like my productivity when that would happen, there's a story I tell of I got misgendered by someone in a meeting early on. It was an hour-long meeting. It happened 10 minutes in. I couldn't tell you what happened the other 50 minutes. It went into a daze, right? I was not paying attention. I couldn't think. I was upset, but couldn't show it. Yeah, and then, there are people who want to know things that honestly is not their business. I haven't had that happen here, but that does happen. That has happened outside. I know it happens to a lot of people. And, I try and be an open book. I prefer to answer the questions, and I've really taken that approach here at work, and just like telling people things and saying, you can ask me whatever, because I would rather someone hear it from a trans person than like going to Wikipedia, like looking it up on Google, or like listening to something like that. But even there, like being the only one, being the person who has to do that emotional labor, that takes a lot out of you. We're going on 5 years now that I've been out at work. And I'm still kind of the go-to person for these things. We're doing this update. Hey, we want to make sure this language is inclusive. Hey, there's this blog post coming out. I have all my normal job responsibilities, but these things still come up. And I'm happy to do it, because who else is going to do it? I want to make sure that it's done right? Same thing. Ask me the questions, because, yeah, I want to make sure that it's done right. But it's extra work. It's unpaid work, and it really taxes you. And I think there's a tendency, not just with my community, not just with trans people, with queer people, with so many different identities, of, hey, let's go ask that one person who works here, the only one in the room, and have them do this thing, right? And not even thinking about what that impact is.
Mhm.
That's just not helpful in general. I don't
No.
think anyone wants to feel like the only one. I've made myself comfortable being the only one because I'm still the only trans woman here,
Mhm.
especially in this office. Yeah, and I'm very visible. I'm very visible, and I had to make myself comfortable with that. Um, but I think for many people, there can be an expectation that you will be comfortable with it.
Mhm.
They got lucky with me, right?
Yeah.
They got lucky with me.
Yeah.
Which, hey, good for them, good for me. I've been lucky. I've been really lucky. But that was a really long answer.
No, I appreciate you.
There's a
I
lot that goes
appreciate.
into it.
I really appreciate you sharing that with us, and I think, like you were saying, I imagine it can be quite a responsibility or like, but burden. Maybe I don't know how you feel about that word,
Yeah,
on
no.
your shoulder in terms of guiding a whole company on how to act in terms of when it comes to being a trans woman or trans woman in your case, with regards to how to approach even job descriptions or wording in certain aspects of, well, everything, I imagine,
Yeah.
people probably come to you for. So no, really, really,
I said this. Oh, sorry. Go
no,
ahead.
you go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I actually told them this year. I usually do something for Transgender Day of Visibility in March. I said, I'm not doing this anymore. Not unless we hire somebody else. I'm not doing this presentation anymore. I can't do it because I start cheering up at this point.
Yeah,
It gets frustrating. Um, and yeah,
big
it's
responsibility.
an interesting experience to say the least. But
Yeah,
there's a burden to your point, and what I was trying to respond to is like, yes, it is a burden. It can be a burden. And yeah, that will push a lot of people away. That will push a
yeah.
lot of people.
Yeah, no, well, like I said, I really, appreciate you sharing that. I think, um, it's good for companies to be aware of things that are unhelpful, because I'm sure people that have, approached you with these things of how to help and things like that have come with very good intentions, but sometimes just don't understand that that's actually not how it's received. So more of those helpful things that Maya mentioned there for companies listening or managers listening in, or even just colleagues, friends, whatever the case is, of how to be helpful in those circumstances. And can I ask you a question?
Of
Did
course.
you, because I know you mentioned that you were navigating it, for the first time with your employers, with your friends, etc. Did you know anyone who had transitioned before that yourself?
I did. I did. I knew one person. One person. They transitioned quite a bit earlier, like a
Mm-hmm.
number of years before. Um, but there were a lot of people who came out because of me. Friends, some coworkers, like by me coming out and being visible, they said, "Hey, I can do this." But yeah, no, it was only one person. And like I said, it had been so many years that they got a lot of it. They were able to kind of guide me a little bit, but I barely even remember what they were like before that.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, like I said, really appreciate you sharing that story with us. What's the story? It's your life. That's a wrong word to say. But yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that with us. I think it's important for everybody, regardless of level where you are in your career or outside of work, that people are able to understand somebody else's perspective, how that is received, and what is helpful in those circumstances. I guess on to one of our final questions then. I know we've got a couple of minutes left here. What do you hope for the future of workplaces when it comes to
I hope that people remain committed. I think that's the biggest thing. It comes back to that standing by the moral case for DEI. You look at how Target has approached things since last year during Pride Month. You look at Budweiser and the whole Bud Light backlash and things like that. And this keeps happening with companies where they're getting a little bit of a backlash. And instead of saying like, no, this is just the right thing to do. We believe that trans people are valid. That's the right thing to do. Um, they're backpedaling. People are slashing budgets, getting rid of entire DEI functions, instead of doubling down, instead of saying like, no, we believe in this. Because when you backpedal, when you walk away from it, when you cut things, even if you don't mean it, what it signals is that you actually never cared in the first place. It
yeah.
was all performance, right? It was, hey, this black man was murdered horrifically by police, and everyone else is saying something, so we feel like we need to too. But now that it's inconvenient for us, we're not dealing with it, right?
Mm.
And it's that That's not allyship. That's part of the problem. That
Mhm.
has always been part of the problem. And that's why Black Lives Matter existed and started in the first place, because there are people who were like, oh, well, yeah, I have black friends, but actually standing up for them, that's inconvenient for me. That doesn't work with my
Yeah.
lifestyle, right? Like, and you see this so often. But that's, I think, the biggest thing that I hope for is that, and beyond that, that more places actually become inclusive, that more places are more introspective and think about, again, like, why do we have these policies in place? Hey, why can't we retain trans employees? Why can't we retain black employees or Latin employees or disabled employees? And then trying to work on that. Again, and this for my own community, so many people can't even find a job. Or if they do find a job, like, they're prevented from being themselves. They feel like they can't be themselves. I hope that changes. I want there to be a world where everyone can get work if they want it, and that they
Mm.
actually feel like they can be themselves at work. And I think that's where we need to get to that place. Everyone should feel comfortable at work, not just the straight cis white men.
Yeah.
They felt comfortable anyways. They're always going to feel comfortable, and all the research points that out too, right? Like, nothing
Yeah.
dissuades them. Um,
Mhm.
we need them as allies, obviously. Um, they're on all the boards. I don't know if you saw Elf Beauty has this campaign right now about boards. You can cut this out if you want to, but the
No,
campaign
I
is
didn't see
called.
it, but I'm interested. I'll be
No,
Googling it after.
well, the campaign is called. I think it's Too Many Dicks, because it's like 98% of people who are like, there are all these men named Richard or Dick
Yeah.
on these boards, and only a few women on boards, right? And so they're
Mm.
really trying to bring awareness to this,
Yeah.
which I think is hilarious, and the double entendre is amazing. But like, again, that shouldn't be the case.
No.
Everyone should be able to feel comfortable at work. Everyone should be able to see themselves represented at a high level. Everyone should feel like they can be themselves. I think
Mhm.
that's really where I would like to see everywhere go. I don't want to have to think about, if I ever left 23andMe, would I have as good of an experience someplace else? It certainly is a factor in keeping me here, but not the only one.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
love my job. I love where I'm at,
Mhm.
but you know, that's not the case, and I think that's where we need to do a lot of work.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think as time moves on from 2020, where there was a big movement in that area, companies just don't seem to be as well, especially over the last year or so. I'd say there's been a lot of, without getting it so into politics, there's been a lot of downfall in that side of things, and it's allowed companies and people at the top to say, this isn't actually something we're bothered about, and say it freely.
Right.
We find the right people, and we don't really care who it is. We're just going to get them there, which is, we've got to find the right people for the job and getting that representation in, but if you, like I said to you, like, if you don't have that open talent pool of representation, how are you even going to know who's the best for the person for the job? And it's just having that argument with people sometimes can be tiring for everyone.
That's it.
But yeah, exactly. But on that positive note, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast, Maya. Let's keep it positive for the last comment of the
Yes.
podcast. If you had a positive message to leave the listeners, what would that be?
People are more empathetic than you think. People actually want to do well, and I think most people want to do well. They want to be a good human. Remembering that and engaging with that can take you a long way, right? That's a lot of what my personal strategy is here. And just keeping that in mind, like, yeah, things seem like we're really in the darkest timeline right now. Things are, it just gets worse and worse and worse every year, it seems, but most people actually want to do good. They
Yeah.
care about other people. Yeah, keep that in mind. Use it to your advantage if you're pushing for DEI things. Because, yeah, I'm surprised humans are generally good people. Not all
Yeah.
of them, but generally, I
Most
think
of
most
them.
people are. And
Yeah.
so, it's important to remember that. And I think
Yeah.
that's maybe the most positive thing I can say right now is
Yeah.
there are a lot
No,
of
that
good
was
people
a
out
good That was a good final note. Like I said, really, really appreciate you coming on the podcast, sharing a little bit about your journey and everything that's going on over at 23andMe as well. Sounds like a great place to work. I own customers. Was that a dog?
Yeah, it was.
Oh, cute. We should have brought them on the podcast. That would have been
I
great.
know, yeah.
More viewers. But yeah, no, really appreciate you joining. Thank you very much again. I don't know if anyone's looking for a job, if they can reach out to you. Over for 23andMe. I'm sure there might be a few people messaging you. But again, thank you so much, and it's been a pleasure to have you on.
Of course, it's been a pleasure. Truly. Thank you.